Hey everybody! Robert Mueller, the glorious and mighty, descended from the heavens today and issued a public statement. Wow. So exciting to finally see the man in the flesh vocalizing things that he had previously only put to text. So I'm sure you were all thrilled and overjoyed in watching Robert Mueller deliver his statement today, which was a big surprise. I mean, he didn't even tease it. He could have made it a must-watch TV event and announced it like a week ahead of time, and everybody would have been crowding around their computers and TV sets with popcorn and stuff. But, he announced it this morning, and he came out. And number one, I mean, this is sort of what I had anticipated. Part of the reason for the statement was simply that Mueller's work at the special counsel's office is complete. Up until now, he had actually still been an employee of the Justice Department, and the special counsel's office was still active. So even though the report had been issued in March and then released in April, up until at least today, Mueller was still an active employee of that office. So he said today he's resigning, and that's it. Now, that'll actually make it easier for Democrats to compel Mueller to testify before Congress, because while he was still a member of the Justice Department or an executive branch employee, Trump could exert privilege in thwarting him from testifying. Now, Trump didn't actually assert that privilege, but he could have, and he still may be able to, given certain legal details and wrinkles. But at the very least, his now not being an employee of the Justice Department makes it a lot more feasible that he's going to eventually testify before Congress, most likely the House, possibly the Senate as well. But anyway, there is some important notes that I wanted to share relating to his comments today. First, my takeaway is that this was a political statement on his part. He wasn't obligated to make this statement. It was a totally done on his own initiative. He said as much. He said nobody encouraged or discouraged him from making a statement or told him what he could or could not say. So this was all on Mueller's own initiative to come out and do something rather dramatic for him, which is to make a public statement, which he hadn't done in over 2 years, at least on camera, verbally. So what were the motivations behind him doing that? Again, to me, it's clear. And I inferred this the first time I watched the statement, and then I read the text of it afterwards, and it became even more abundantly clear, which is that Robert Mueller wants to instigate impeachment proceedings. The things he chose to emphasize in his statement clearly were tailored toward instigating Democrats or whomever, Justin Amash, who's a Republican who favors impeachment, to initiate the proceedings. Mueller all but explicitly advocated impeachment. Obviously, he's not going to come out and demand it outright, but given the constraints under which he's operating, he couldn't have been more clear that that was what his intended outcome was. Some examples. Mueller said, remember, everything Mueller says, whether it's in the report, although there are actually some grammatical and other minor factual errors in the report, and I'll actually have some piece that will make reference to that coming out sometime in the next week or two or something like that. Anyway, sidebar. Generally speaking, everything that Mueller says, whether in written or verbal form, is extremely fine-tuned and deliberate. So what he chose to include in the statement and what he chose to exclude is very telling as to his motivation. So here's what he said. The matters we investigated were of paramount importance. It was critical for us to obtain full and accurate information from every person we questioned. One of the people he questioned was Trump. Remember, they sought an in-person interview with Trump. Trump resisted. Mueller's people apparently contemplated challenging Trump's resistance through the courts, but it would have dragged on for potentially years, and he wanted to expedite the process, so they didn't choose to contest Trump's refusal to provide an in-person interview in the courts. Trump did submit written answers to questions, and so he was one of the hundreds of people who were questioned by Mueller. Mueller goes on, when a subject of an investigation, like Trump, obstructs that investigation or lies to investigators, let me just clarify. Mueller didn't say like Trump. That's my addition. I'll start again. When a subject of an investigation obstructs that investigation or lies to investigators, it strikes at the core of their government's effort to find the truth and hold wrongdoers accountable. Okay. Again, Trump was a subject of the investigation. He was questioned. His personal conduct was investigated so as to ascertain whether Trump committed crimes. Now, Mueller has this whole legal reasoning that is kind of spurious, frankly, about why Mueller could not himself charge Trump with crimes, but the whole reason why there is investigation, at least and especially on the obstruction element, was to determine whether Trump committed crimes. That's why he was questioned. So Trump, and given that Mueller laid out potentially obstructive acts that Trump committed, Mueller is, by pretty reasonable inference, alleging that what Trump did, quote, struck at the core of his government's effort to find the truth and hold wrongdoers accountable. Okay? That's a strong, sharply worded statement from Mueller, and it directly implicates Trump. Another notable comment from Mueller was, again, a matter of framing and emphasis. Now, in the Mueller report, Mueller is fairly declarative in terms of asserting that no conspiracy was established. Here's the wording from Volume 1, page 2. Quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. Okay, that was the big top-line takeaway that everybody immediately found out about when the report was issued. It was in the Barr letter of March 24th. Mueller, when he's recounting the findings of the report in this statement today, doesn't use that phrasing. He uses a different phrasing. He says, or he references their conclusion that, quote, there was insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy. Now, it might seem a little arcane to distinguish between those two statements, but it's actually significant. Does not establish is, again, a lot more declarative. Mueller could have just as easily said, the investigation did not find sufficient evidence that the members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated. He used a different phrase. He said, did not establish. And there are different levels of authoritativeness in those statements. If he's just going with the standard of insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy, that very much leaves open the possibility that there's additional evidence out there that he somehow didn't come across that could have established a conspiracy. So the fact that he chose that formulation is significant because not only is he suggesting that Trump committed impeachable offenses around obstruction, he's now saying that collusion isn't really resolved, or conspiracy, or what have you. And again, in the Mueller report, there actually is a line where he does use that language around of insufficient evidence, but on other parts, he uses the more authoritative "does not establish" phrasing. So the fact that he chose one over the other for this public statement is indicative of his intent, which is that he wants to do everything within his power, given the limitations of his position, to encourage the initiation of impeachment proceedings. He then reiterates, so he didn't have to, the report is 448 pages. So what he chose to selectively put into the statement today, again, is very telling. And he says, quote, "If we had evidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime." Now, that construction is bizarre on multiple levels because as a prosecutor, your charge is not to find evidence that exculpates an investigation subject. It's to find evidence that would inculpate the subject, meaning allow you to charge that individual with the crime. So most often, a prosecutor is not going to say, "We found evidence that this person did not commit a crime." No, you just decline to press charges, and that speaks for itself. So Mueller's engaging in weird legal reasoning here that is sort of defies precedent. There might be other precedents you could find, but certainly the ordinary course of duties for a prosecutor is not to state that a person did not commit a crime. It's to state either that you're alleging that they committed a crime or that you have insufficient grounds to bring charges for the commission of a crime, and therefore you'd say nothing. Mueller says that he went further than he did in the report on this too, where he said he declared it, quote, "unconstitutional" for the sitting president to be charged with a crime. And therefore, he didn't view it as an option to charge Trump with any crimes. He's overstating it for sure by simply declaring that unconstitutional. Yes, there is an OLC, Office of Legal Counsel memo, which prohibits the charging of a president with a crime, a sitting president. But it's very much an open legal question as to whether Mueller was ever bound by that memo. It's not as if this issue has ever been tested in the courts. There's no Supreme Court decision affirming that the president can't be charged with a crime. There's simply a memo sitting in the executive branch asserting such. And there are other memos which have different conclusions. There's a good piece, it's long and sort of dense, but if you're interested, there's a good piece by Andrew Crespo, who's a professor at Harvard Law School, which makes the argument that Mueller was in fact not bound by the OLC memo, and it would have been within his purview to charge Trump if he saw fit. Alan Dershowitz makes the same point. I don't agree with everything Alan Dershowitz says about the Russia case or anything else, but Dershowitz has a point that Mueller really took a cop-out by just saying, we're not going to make a decision one way or another. I have a feeling that if Mueller found evidence that Trump had masterminded a conspiracy to, undermine the 2016 election by partnering with Russia, Mueller would have charged Trump on that. So, because obviously they very, very zealously pursued that line of inquiry. So the idea that Mueller would have just sat back and said, "Oh, too bad, we can't charge Trump on this conspiracy we just uncovered, which, totally shattered our democracy," that's not feasible. Either way, Mueller goes on to state that, quote, The Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing. Gee, what processes might those be? There's only really one, and that would be impeachment. So that's not even really a thinly veiled reference to impeachment. It's almost all but outright advocating it. I mean, what more could he have said to instigate Congress into initiating impeachment? Pretty much nothing. So anyway, he says, I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress, but almost certainly he's going to appear before Congress. He's going to be pressed by members of both parties to provide information beyond that which is already public, and he's probably going to be, interrogated into doing that because there's only so much wiggle room you have in his position. So I don't really believe that he's going to strictly limit himself to what's in the report, because in this public statement he actually did go beyond the report in some ways. And he concluded his statement by again emphasizing what he views as the paramount importance of everything that was investigated, by saying he wanted to, make sure everyone understands that there were, quote, multiple systemic efforts to interfere in our election. I don't know what systemic means. I would like him to define systemic. Whatever interference efforts might have existed, they seem sort of ramshackle. Like some Facebook memes and Twitter trolls and some spearfish Gmail accounts. I mean, is that this systemic effort? Even if it was directed by the Russian government, which is alleged but hasn't been proven in a court of law, which is still a standard we should want to appreciate. Is that systemic? I mean, I don't know that systemic would be the right word there, necessarily. Anyway, every single Democrat in the House, in the Senate, or the presidential candidates are going to be pressed on this. They're going to say, Mueller, people are going to ask them, hey, you, ma'am, or guy, Mueller pretty clearly was advocating for impeachment in that statement today on May 29th, which he was. Why are you not on board with impeachment? So every Democrat who was some wavering or equivocating on impeachment is now going to have this extra pressure, given Mueller's statement, to revise their position and endorse at least the initiation of impeachment proceedings. I don't see how it's going to be tenable for much longer for them to resist that, aside from a select group who aren't bound by those pressures for a variety of reasons. But for your generic Democrat, it's seeming more and more like an inevitability. Cory Booker, moments it seemed like after Mueller's statement, revised his position and said that impeachment must be initiated immediately, whereas in the past he had equivocated pretty much. He said we have to do the process, blah blah blah. But now, after the statement today, he's much more forthright. That's because this Mueller statement changed the political calculus for a lot of these people, for sure. So, it was actually good timing, because yesterday I published a column in the New York Daily News on impeachment and made a number of points, but one of which is that you'll often hear people saying, we just want to impeach Trump on obstruction, not necessarily collusion. You can separate these out. They're not the same thing. You can impeach him on one but not the other. I say that's BS for the following reason. Impeachment is by nature a political proceeding. You hear that repeated over and over again, and it's true. It's not a strictly legal proceeding. Yeah, there's a legal component, obviously, but at core, it's a political maneuver. And in a political sense, and in a political context, collusion and obstruction can never be strictly separated. In a legalistic, technical context, yes, they're different offenses. You can separate them. But politically, they're too commingled to ever fully parse out in the way people are suggesting is possible. And why is that? Well, in the public mind, and ultimately the audience for impeachment proceedings would be the American public. They'd be the ones tuning in to the televised hearings. They'd be the ones, fighting every day about it on social media, blah, blah, blah. So they're the audience. And in the public mind, obstruction and collusion are sort of bundled together in this cluster of Russia-Mueller-related issues. And on top of that, obstruction only ever arose as a live issue as a result of the collusion investigation. So even in a more, tangible, direct sense, they're inextricably linked. But furthermore, how are you going to expect average Americans to be able to sit there and watch these hearings or even hear snippets of the hearings and say to myself, you know what, I'm gonna very meticulously distinguish impeachment from or obstruction from collusion. It's not going to happen. It's all going to be under the same vague category of Russia stuff. Because it is all in the same category of Russia stuff. And on top of that, you have national politicians conflating collusion and obstruction. Maybe they want to impeach primarily on obstruction-related grounds, but at the same time, when they provide a rationale for that, they will invoke collusion themes. Beto did this last week on a CNN town hall, and I quoted it in the Daily News piece, where he was saying, one of the reasons why it's so important to initiate impeachment proceedings is that we still have to get to the bottom of what happened in 2016. So he's saying collusion is not a resolved question, and impeachment would allow for the resolution of that question. Elizabeth Warren, when she demands impeachment, has also invoked collusion-related themes. I'm sure there are more that I don't have off the top of my head. So when national politicians are themselves grouping these two items together under the same political rubric, how are people saying that these are not gonna be melded together in the context of a turbocharged, very emotional, intense impeachment proceeding? It's a fantasy. It's never going to happen. If articles of impeachment are ever brought, I can virtually guarantee you that there's going to be something that's thematically related to collusion in the articles of impeachment. Maybe they don't specifically allege that Trump conspired with Russia, but something that relates to the broader collusion matter is going to be incorporated into the ultimate articles of impeachment that are brought. You could take that to the bank. Anyway, I got worked up, as you could tell. Although, I feel like I'm keeping my cool, mostly. I'm going to link to the column in the Daily News, so please read that. I'm going to link to the Lawfare article I mentioned. Read that if you so desire. And also, consider giving a contribution through Patreon, PayPal, etc. Helps me continue to do this kind of work. You might not consider this work, but it is in a way. I am producing labor for your consumption. And if you give me money, frankly, to be totally honest about it, it allows me to do more stuff. More reporting. If it requires travel, obviously that's an expense. So, if you want more independent journalism, and I'm happy to be on, I was on Tucker last night where I was introduced as an independent journalist, which is great. You gotta, if you value it, you have to, or you should be at least willing to pay some modest sum for it. And it doesn't have to just be me, although that would be nice. It could be anybody. But, for my purposes, I want to provide more of this sort of thing, and that requires resources. So, if you see fit, please consider that. I'm producing at least one podcast every week. I have written pieces that come out every week. I try to do a YouTube commentary of some kind, roughly once a day. So, I'm trying. And if you feel like you're getting something of value from that, please consider a modest contribution. And the links for all that are, as usual, in the description box. All right, that's it for now, and I will talk to you later.